Dave Henderson wasn't just a gardener, he was an artist whose canvas happened to be the 60-foot boxwood hedge framing his property. The hedge had become something of a neighborhood landmark. Tourists actually stopped to photograph its intricate spiral patterns and perfect geometric shapes. Local garden clubs had begged him to host workshops, and the city's botanical garden director had personally visited to study his techniques. The hedge represented more than just Dave's passion. He'd started it the day after his wife's funeral 3 years ago, channeling his grief into creating something beautiful. Each perfectly trimmed section held memories. The eastern corner was where his granddaughter took her first steps. The archway in the center was where he proposed to his late wife 30 years earlier, when the property belonged to her parents. Enter Marjorie Wilkinson, who swept into the Oakwood Estates HOA presidency like a storm front. A former corporate executive who'd retired under mysterious circumstances, Marjorie approached HOA enforcement with military precision. She patrolled the neighborhood in her gleaming white Mercedes convertible, designer sunglasses perched on her nose, clipboard in hand. Neighbors had nicknamed her the Cetacean Queen for her ability to find violations where none existed. At the first HOA meeting under her reign, Marjorie projected a slideshow of community ISOs with Dave's hedge featured prominently. According to Bylaw 7.32, ornamental barriers cannot exceed 5 feet, she announced, dramatically revealing a tape measure on screen. This monstrosity is nearly 6 feet. The room erupted in protests. Even Marjorie's allies loved Dave's hedge, but she silenced them with a sharp rap of her gavel. Dave came home from his daughter's college graduation weekend to find disaster. Not only had a third of his hedge been butchered, but the cuts were deliberately destructive, diagonally slashed to ensure the plants would die rather than recover. The invoice taped to his door included charges for aesthetic correction services and disposal of non-compliant vegetation. The cuts had been made with surgical precision to target the section where Dave had painstakingly trained the branches to form the initials E+D, Elizabeth and Dave, visible only from his bedroom window. It was their private symbol, a daily reminder of the 42 years they'd shared before cancer took her. Now it was mangled beyond recognition. "What happened?" asked Mrs. Chen from next door, finding Dave on his knees before the ruined hedge, still in his travel clothes, the airline tag dangling from his carry-on. "Marjorie happened," Dave replied, his voice hollow as he held up the invoice. The $350 charge included a $75 emergency intervention fee and a $125 aesthetic non-compliance penalty. Mrs. Chen's expression darkened. She didn't even wait for the meeting vote. "The board was supposed to review your variance request this Thursday." 2 doors down, retired Judge Wilson stepped out onto his porch, binoculars in hand. "Been watching her for weeks," he called over. "Takes pictures of everyone's properties while we're at work. Got my grandson Tommy to count. She measured your hedge 14 times last month alone." As neighbors gathered, sharing their own Marjorie horror stories, Dave remained unusually quiet. 30 years in military logistics had taught him to assess situations before acting. While outwardly he appeared defeated, his mind was already calculating angles, documenting the damage, and formulating contingencies. That evening, as sunset painted the neighborhood in golden hues, Marjorie's white Mercedes cruised slowly past Dave's house. She rolled down her window just enough to be heard. 5 feet, Mr. Henderson, not 1 inch more. Her smile never reached her eyes. Rules are rules. What she couldn't see was Dave in his darkened study, camera in hand, documenting every second of the encounter. On his desk lay the original HOA bylaws he'd retrieved from county records that afternoon. Bylaw 7.32 mentioned fences and structural barriers, but there was no mention of living plants or hedges anywhere in the document. The game, as they said in the military, was afoot. Dave's research uncovered something the neighborhood had forgotten. Oakwood Estates had been built on the grounds of a former heritage garden. County archives contained the original property surveys, which revealed a critical discrepancy. The road widening project from 15 years ago had never been properly recorded, leaving a 3-foot strip of land that was legally still part of Dave's property. This strip happened to be exactly where Marjorie now parked her Mercedes daily, claiming she needed to monitor compliance from that vantage point. The same spot where she'd begun hosting her Property Standards Committee meetings in lawn chairs, deliberately within earshot of Dave's home office. Meanwhile, Marjorie escalated her campaign. Dave's neighbors received letters questioning the declining property values due to botanical irregularities at his address. The HOA newsletter featured a thinly veiled editorial about certain residents who believe rules don't apply to them. Dave's monthly HOA bill now included accumulating fines that had reached $3,200. The situation reached its breaking point during the neighborhood's annual garden tour. Marjorie had deliberately excluded Dave's garden, despite its popularity in previous years. As tourists walked the official route, many asked about the famous Hedge house. Annoyed by this, Marjorie impulsively grabbed her shears and headed to Dave's property to address ongoing violations before visitors could wander over. Dave, hosting his granddaughter's birthday party in the backyard, rounded the corner just as Marjorie was attacking a newly regrown section. His security system captured her freezing mid-cut, then deliberately making 3 more slashes before dropping the shears and claiming she was just inspecting. That night, after consulting his lawyer one final time, Dave made his decision. He would reclaim what was legally his. Dave wasn't just angry, he was heartbroken. The section destroyed contained the initials he had carefully grown to honor his late wife. But beneath his gentle gardener's exterior was the strategic mind of a retired logistics officer who had coordinated supply chains across 3 war zones. His first counter-move was to install solar-powered security cameras disguised as garden ornaments. Within days, they captured Marjorie measuring his regrowing hedge at 3 a.m., garden shears gleaming in the moonlight. More disturbingly, she was applying something from a bottle labeled brush killer to his soil. Dave created a neighborhood email group, Friends of Oakwood Gardens, ostensibly to share gardening tips, but really to build a coalition. He discovered that Marjorie had antagonized nearly everyone, fining the elderly Johnsons for a bird feeder that attracted undesirable wildlife, threatening the Patels with sanctions for their children's basketball hoop, and demanding the removal of the Bennett family's wheelchair wrap because it wasn't made from approved materials. The HOA meeting became standing room only when Dave presented his case. He brought in a licensed landscaper who confirmed the hedge's value at over $15,000, and a botanist who testified about the permanent damage caused by the chemicals Marjorie had applied. Dave's lawyer presented evidence that the bylaw had been amended under suspicious circumstances just weeks after Marjorie moved in. Despite the evidence, Marjorie's procedural maneuvering resulted in a narrow victory for her interpretation. That night, Dave's security system alerted him to movement. The footage showed Marjorie not only trimming his regrowth, but spraying the roots with chemicals while her friend Patricia kept watch from the idling Mercedes. When Dave confronted them with his phone recording the encounter, Marjorie smirked. "It's nearly midnight. No one's going to believe you didn't edit this footage." She pointed to his hedge. 5 feet, not 1 inch more, or next time I won't just trim it. Dave didn't just plan his revenge. He orchestrated it with the precision of a symphony conductor. First, he filed the corrected property line documents with the county. Then he scheduled contractors, landscapers, and a court-approved civil witness, all for the same day, which happened to coincide with Marjorie's standing hair appointment. By 9 a.m., workers had installed decorative but formidable limestone, edging exactly along his property line, complete with small but legal private property markers. By noon, they had planted a row of rose bushes with particularly wicked thorns, all carefully maintained at exactly 4'11" in height. The civil witness documented everything, including measurements proving compliance with even Marjorie's interpretation of the bylaws. Dave then invited a reporter from the local paper who had been covering garden features to document his new boundary garden. The resulting article, including the history of the property dispute, appeared online just as Marjorie was leaving the salon. She arrived to find her parking spot gone and a small crowd of neighbors casually gathered to admire Dave's innovative property line enhancement. Furious, she attempted to maneuver her Mercedes between Dave's new border and a fire hydrant, a tight squeeze that her luxury vehicle's width couldn't accommodate. The distinctive sound of metal scraping against stone was followed by Marjorie's shriek of outrage. In her haste to confront Dave, she flung her car door open directly into the rose thorns, which left a distinctive pattern of scratches across the pristine white paint. When she stormed onto his property, Dave calmly pointed to the "No Trespassing" sign, another perfectly legal addition. Marjorie's attempt to sue for malicious landscaping backfired spectacularly in court. Dave's meticulous documentation, including time-stamped videos of her midnight vandalism and chemical applications, resulted in the judge not only dismissing her case, but ordering her to pay for the restoration of his hedge plus damages. The final bill came